Hello and welcome to Intro to Advanced Calculations. My name is Steve Martinez and I'll be walking you through the content today. I'm part of the technical team here at Tableau, and I often meet with customers looking for advice on how to tackle a certain problem or meet a particular business requirement, and oftentimes the answer is quite simply, oh, you can do that with a table calculation, or hey, you can do that by using a level of detail calculation. Unfortunately, those answers are met with a look of either confusion, as in, what are you talking about? What's a level of detail calculation? Or it's met with a look of despair because they've already tried to figure out how those calculations work and they're too confused and they gave up. Well, today I want to take the mystery out of these types of advanced calculations and get you comfortable enough to start using them with regularity. Because these calculations are incredibly powerful and can take your visualizations to new heights, allowing for greater analysis and a deeper understanding of the data. Now, for today's presentation, I'm going to be working in Tableau Desktop. Let me just bring that up here. And though I'm working in Tableau Desktop, you can also do everything using web authoring and Tableau Server if you choose to do so. I'm actually connected to the Superstore data set that comes with Tableau Desktop. So if you want, you can go ahead and connect to that data source as well and follow along if you want. I want to start with table calculations. Table calcs have been around in Tableau forever, but they're probably the single biggest cause of confusion with Tableau. But they shouldn't be. So let's take a moment and talk a little bit about table calcs, what they are, why we would use them, and how they work. Table calculations are a special type of calculated field that are they're based on what is currently in the visualization, and they don't consider any dimension or even fields in a dimension that are not included or filtered out of the visualization. And Tableau offers the ability to build your own table calculations, but also a variety of pre-built table calcs that we can leverage. So let's take a look at that. To start, I'm going to go ahead and just take my order date and drag that onto columns. And let me just set this to month. And let's take a category onto my rows. So I'm showing my month by product category, and I'm just going to take sales and just drop it on here. So now we can see the actual sales figures for every month for every category. Now, in order to leverage pre-built table calculations, all I need to do is click on the pill that represents the measure that I want to do the table calculation on. In this case, sum of sales. I could just drop down the list with the arrow, and you can see that we have a variety of quick table calculations already created for us. So for instance, if I chose running total, you can see that the data has changed. And just to make this a little bit easier, I'm also going to just drag sales back on here. So now I have sales, and then I have my running total of sales. Okay, so sales is showing me for January 31,569. Since that's the beginning of time, my running total is also 31,569. It's the first element in my table. And then in February, I sold another 15,000. So now my running total is 47,000, and that continues on. That is continuing on across my dimension, but I can, if I want, actually dictate how these calculations are going to be determined. So I can say compute using. Right now, by default, it's set to table across, which means in this case, it's going to sum up January, February, March, and April, and so on. I could say table down, and my results are quite different. So now I see that this is still the first element in my my table. So my sales figure and my running sales sum, my running total of sales are the same. But now I have an additional 33,000 from office supplies in January. So I'm taking the 31,000 in furniture, the 33,000 in office supplies, and I'm getting 64,000 for my running total. Add another 30,000 of that for technology. The running sum is now 94,000 and change. So I'm calculating down. When I get to February, it starts all over again. So the running sum starts at 15,000, 36, 59. So we have a variety of options available to us. We have table across then down, etc. And we'll dive into this a little bit more, because actually it's really hard to grasp what is all going on when we're dealing with big numbers like sales. What I like to do is leverage a table calculation formula that really kind of puts it all together for us and makes things easier to understand. So I'm going to create a table calculation, or just create a calculation. It's called index. And over here, I'm just going to go to my table calculation or my formulas and choose table calculation. And I can see that I have a variety of formulas that are available to me. The one that I'm going to use right now is this index formula. And just say OK. Now what that does, I'm just going to drag this onto the screen. Let me drag it up to the top. So now you can see index is essentially just a counter. It's telling us that this is the first element or the first cell in the table, and this is the second, and so on and so forth, all the way to 12. And again, we have the ability to determine how we want to calculate that, whether it's table across or table down, where we just get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or even table across then down, 1 through 12, and then starts back up again, 13 through 24, and then 25 through 36. These types of indexes allow us to then leverage our position within the table, any cell's position within the table, to do something else. So let's have a play with a couple other ones, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm just going to set this back to table across because that's the easiest to visualize. Let's create another table calculation for a moment. In this case, I'm going to leverage another formula that's really handy, and let's call this our first. And it's just as the formula is, it's called first, and I'm going to say OK. I'm going to drag first right here just below the index. So now you can see that we have January furniture has an index of 1 and this first value of 0. What first does is it says how many steps do I need to take forward, backwards, upwards, or up or down to get to the first cell, the cell that has an index of 1. Okay, so since we're calculating this 1 through 12, just calculating across, and I know January is my first cell. It has an index of 1, so I have to take 0 steps forward or backwards to get to the first cell. So my first measure is returning 0. When I get to February, I have an index of 2, and so my first is telling me I have to go -1, so I have to take 1 step backwards to get to the first cell. Okay, and on, that continues on. These are going to come in really handy when we're trying to do a reference to another cell. And just as we can do first, I'm going to create another calculation, which is last. And you guessed it, I'm just going to use this last function. And again, if I drag last just right below first, now that it shows me, okay, for January, I have an index of 1. I take 0 steps to get to the first cell because January is my first cell. But I need to take 11 steps, a positive 11, so 11 steps forward to get to the last. So I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and I land at December. Okay? This is going to allow us to start traversing the table in either direction. Now, if I was calculating this table down, then these would be completely different results. But I think you guys get it. We're starting with calculating using table across because it's the easiest to visualize for us right here. So how could we use some of these calculations. I'm going to create another calculation here, and let's call this one first. Oh, sorry, I can't. First month sales. And so now I want to grab the first month sales. Maybe I want to reference that in some type of calculation. And let me go ahead and type this up. I'm going to use a lookup, and I'm going to increase the font for you. There we go. Hopefully you can read that a little bit better. So lookup, I'm going to look up the sum of sales, and I want to look up the sum of sales from, by navigating to the first cell. All right, so there we go, and say OK. And I'm going to grab first month sales. I'm just going to pop that right here under last. All right, so now that gives us this guy right here. So essentially what that's telling us is grab the sum of look up the sum of sales that is that's appropriate for the, I guess you can call it the address of a cell so many steps behind, in front, above, or below me. Okay. So in this case, let's bring up that calculation again so you can view it at the same time. And I gotta increase my font again. So there we go. So I'm saying, okay, I'm in January. Look up the sum of sales in the cell, and then how many positions do I want to move, which is this, and I want to move the number of positions to get me to first. And in this case, in January, if you remember, first returns a 0. So I move 0 positions, and I look up sum of sales. Sum of sales happens to be 31,569, so my first month of sales is 31,569. In February, however, I am going to say, okay, I'm in the second month. I want to look up the sum of sales first, so I need to navigate -1 back. -1 back is January furniture, and then the sum of sales for January furniture happens to be 31,569. I want to be very explicit here in saying that I'm really not just referencing the contents of a cell, because it'd be very easy for us to just say, oh, we'll look up, kind of have a calculation that looks like that, right? Look up first, and that'll work. But you know what? This is super powerful, because I could say, you know what? Let's not look up the sum of sales, but how about sum of profit? It is not even a part of our visualization, but I can go ahead and say, look up the sum of profit, and you can see that now it's bringing up my profit that I happen to get for January furniture. So this is incredibly powerful. I'm going to go ahead and just set this back to sales and say OK. And so now we're getting that 31,569. And then maybe what we want to do is identify, how far we are away from the first month of sales or something like that. We can leverage this calculation now in another calculation or something. So it's incredibly powerful. I also want to show you something else, because right now we're kind of just beholden to the dimensionality of the table. And so in this case, I'm saying, you know what, I can traverse the cells and get a different get an address of a different cell, by using first, last, and lookup, and that's great. But what if I wanted to do I wanted to analyze a group of cells and come up with a value from those groups of cells? We can do that. I'm going to create a calculation, and this is just a little bit different of a table calculation. Let me bring my table calculation up here, because we have all these amazing ones here, and I'm actually going to use this window max. And window max says, okay, what are we going to do? Let's go through this. I want to do window max, and let's grab again our trusty sum of sales. And in this case, now I need to define the start and end of my window. which is different than the table. It's a subset of the table. It's a little window of the table. So I want to say, you know what? Let's take this and go first, and it'll end at whatever current cell that I'm on. So I have to take 0 steps. And let's call this our max sales. And I'm going to say OK. And let's drag this guy on the screen. I'll just drag this right above there. And let's get rid of that running total because we're not using that anymore. So now I have this max sales calculation. And the max sales calculation defines a window because it's doing a window max. So let's take a look at this again. And let me increase the font. There we go. So I'm saying, okay, window max. My window, beginning of my window is first, and my end of my window is going to be the current cell that I'm on. So I'm just hard coding it as 0. So for January, it's saying, well, my window is actually the beginning is 0, the end is 0, because I just want the first cell. Okay, so the window in this case for January, the window is just January, and it's going to be my max sum of sales. In which case it's that one value, so it's that value of 31,569. So my max sales is 31,569. Let's move ahead to February though. Now I'm saying I want my window to start at first, which is -1. So it starts here, and it goes to 0, which is the current one that I'm on. So now my window is 2 cells long, and I want to get the max of that, the max being 31,569 again. So it gets 31,569. Let's move to March. Now March, I want to take first is -2, so I'm going to go 2 backwards, and then it's going to end at 0, which is the current cell. So now for March, my window becomes 3 cells, January, February, March. It's going to give me the max of those 3 values, in which case now my max sales is 5,768. Incredibly powerful. How would we make this work within a visualization? Let's go ahead and say OK, and I'm just going to create a new sheet here, and let's drag order date back onto columns for a moment and set that back to month, and let's drag sales onto our rows. We get a nice line chart. And now what I want to do is let's drag, let's do this. I want to create a calculated field called isMax. And where I want to say, is the sum of sales equal to max sales? Let me just grow that out so you can see it. So sum of sales equals max sales. It's going to return a true or a false for every value in the table. In this case, it's going to first leverage, look at January, and is January equal to the isMax value or the max sales value? So if I did something like this, is this point here equal to this point here? Yes or no? Is this point here equal to this point here? Yes or no? Okay, and so what that's going to allow us to do is something I think is pretty pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate my sales here. So now I have 2 lines, but one of the lines I'm actually just going to turn and make it a circle. Okay, and now let's do a dual axes, and of course we have to synchronize our axes to make it look pretty. So now we have what we want, but now isMax I can set to color. Oops, sorry, wrong one on my circles. isMax to color. And now what it's doing, it's highlighting the circles every time I hit a new max sales for a month. So in January I hit a max sales, and then I don't hit another max sales again until March. And then I don't hit another new high of sales until September, and then I follow that up again in November. So it's a way for us to really kind of highlight what's going on with our data without having to analyze too quickly or too many numbers at any particular time. So that's one incredible valuable part about using table calculations in that window. Another way, and let's create another fun chart, but this time we're going to actually leverage a pre-built table calculation. But these are always fun. Let's do or I'm going to take subcategory and drag this onto columns. And let's take our sum of sales, and drag it onto our rows. All right, so now I get this pretty bar chart. I'm going to change my sum of sales to be a quick table calculation of running total. And this is really interesting. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you, because we have this bar here, which is just accessories. It's the total sales of accessories. But then appliances is actually going to be the total sales of accessories plus appliances. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but bear with me. It will in a moment. So now that we've kind of created this guy here, what I like to do is let's change this mark type to a Gantt bar. So now we're just getting the lines. Okay, so this is kind of the top of our first bar. Oops, sorry. Top of our first bar, top of our second, top of our third. Okay, and what I want to do now is fill in the gap in between the top of this bar and the top of that bar. And I could do that by taking sales and dragging that onto size. And it almost gets us there. You can see that's not quite what we're looking for because it's going from the top of the bar and kind of sizing it upwards. And I actually want to size that. I want the bar to actually go down from the top of the bar. So what I'm going to do is just an inline. I'm going to edit this inline. So I just double clicked on the pill. I'm just double clicking on sum of sales there. And it brings up this little editor. And I'm just going to, right in front of sum of sales, I'm just going to put a little minus sign. It's going to make that a negative number. And so now you can see that I have accessories that start at 0 and then go up to 167,000. And then this bar starts at 167,000 and goes up 107,000 to 274. And then this one starts at 274, goes up 27,000 to 302, on and on and on. It's called a waterfall chart. And we can keep it looking like this. I kind of like to actually have this sorted. So let's sort this by a field, and it's going to be based off of the sum of sales, not the negative sum of sales. So let me grab sales. There we go. And now we have this great waterfall. And we've done that just by using that pre-built table calculation of running sum. I can add a little bit to this. I'm just going to say, you know what, let's show the grand totals. I always like to add color to this as well. So let's add sales to color. And let me just make this full size again for you guys to see. And drag sales also onto the label. So now we know what we've done in each one of those, for each one of those subcategories. And that is how we can create a cool little waterfall chart using our table calculations. Hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to go ahead and just rename this to waterfall, and we'll be good to go. So that is table calculations. Now, the thing that I would recommend is when you're dealing with table calculations, I kind of always create this index calculation because it helps me visualize what I need to do, how I need to traverse a table. So if you're authoring your own table calculations, I highly recommend creating this little index calculation, dropping it onto the table, and of course I like working in the confines of this crosstab of the table so you can visualize what's going on. It's a lot harder for me to write a table calculation if I'm looking at a chart. So I kind of get it all figured out here, and then I can, like I did here, then I can go ahead and create my chart off of that. So those are just a couple little tips for table calculations, but you should be armed enough now to go off and create some amazing table calculations of your own. So hopefully you guys feel the same way. Now let's tackle one of our other little pains of calculations. that provide our customers a little bit of anxiety, and that is what we call an LOD calc, or a level of detail calculation. And a level of detail calculation is really simple. It is, we are going to create a calculation or calculate a value based off of a different level of detail than what our visualization is currently at. So let me show you what that's all about. I'm going to take, let's see here. Let's take order date again. This time I'm going to do this by continuous month. So we have month and year. And let's take our sales again and drop that on here. And here's a really good use case of this. Let's go through this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just quickly, I'm going to create a dashboard. Let's drop that waterfall chart that we created on here. And then right below, let's drop the line chart that we just created. Okay. Oops, I don't want to delete a container. I just want to delete that guy. There we go. So I've created this this particular dashboard, and I'm sure you guys have something like this already. And here's a kind of a pet peeve of mine. I'm going to go ahead and just use this waterfall chart as a filter. So what that means is when I click on something, if I click on one of these objects or marks on my on this waterfall chart, it's going to filter out the line chart below it. So if I click on bookcases, you see that now I'm getting this trend of my sum of sales for bookcases versus accessories or copiers. But what I don't like is that, let me just deselect, this is the trend line for how I'm selling all of my product subcategories. And I think that's still valuable information, but we lose that information as soon as I click on one of the subcategories. So what I like to do is actually create a level of detail calc that is going to allow me to visualize both my total sales as well as the sum of sales for a particular subcategory in the same visualization. Okay, so let's go back to this line chart. We're going to make some changes to it to make this possible. And the first thing that we need to understand is what are we talking about when we say level of detail? So with level of detail in this particular visualization is simple. It is month, and since it's continuous, it's actually month and year, right? We're seeing November 2015, we're seeing November 2016, etc. So I know this year. So if I was to write a select statement, some SQL, for you SQL jockeys out there, my select statement might be like select month order date, comma, year order date, comma, sum sales group by month and year. Okay, so that's my group by here is month and year only. That's the level of detail. But if I actually, let me just take this filter off. If I just go ahead and let's add some more level of detail, some more dimensionality to this. So why don't I take my region dimension and I'll drag that onto columns. So now my visualization, or my level of detail, my visualization has obviously changed, but my level of detail has changed also. So now it's month, year, and region sum of sales. If I took category, let me take my category and drag that right here. So now I'm getting a line chart for every category, for every region, and it's showing me a trend across month and year. So my level of detail for this visualization is month, year, region, and category. Okay? So let's write a level of detail calc that will calc something at an entirely different level of detail than what we're looking at in this visualization. So I'm going to go ahead and say create a calculated field, and let's call this total sales. And my guess is you may have tried to write this at one time, and you probably just said, oh, well, you know what I want is I want the sum of sales. Let me go ahead and just blow this up so you see. So this is just sum of sales is all that's doing. I'm going to say OK. And wow, that's great. That's my total sales, the sum of sales. Let me just drag this right next to my sum of sales here, and everything should be done. Well, not quite, because my sum of sales line here looks very similar, exactly the same as my sum of sales line for central or for total sales. So I'm getting sales and total sales, and they're exactly the same thing. The reason being is that simple calculation of total sales, and when I'm just saying, give me the sum of sales, is still beholden to the level of detail of our visualization, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and change this. And the way that I can identify that I want to use a level of detail calc is with these curly brackets. So I'm going to add a curly bracket on the front and on the end of my my calculation here. And this is a very simple level of detail calculation because I'm not actually defining any level of detail. And when I'm looking for, possibly if I'm looking for total, that might be what we're looking for here. So I'm going to go ahead and just say, give me my sum of sales, and I'll show you how this is going to change. I'm going to get an error here because it's aggregating something and I can't do that anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag total sales back on here. And voila, we have our total sales. Well, not quite. This is a very uninteresting total sales because what I've done is I've said, give me my total sales, which happens to be 2.297 million, 2.297 million. And so I'm getting a flat line. And I don't want a flat line. I actually want to get my total sales for January, my total sales for February, etc. So I need to add a little more level of detail. I add a little more level of detail in my calculation because I'm pretty much just giving me this is kind of like a grand total. So let's go ahead and change this. Let's increase this out. So we got the squiggly brackets, but now I'm going to add a little bit of language here that will help. And one is fixed. And let's do a fixed. Well, let's start with fixed by region. So I'm saying fixed region colon sum of sales. And that's all contained in those curly brackets. And let me go ahead and hit apply. So now, well, our lines have changed slightly. If you remember, they were all the same before. But now I'm getting a different total sales. For instance, if I hover over my line in central, I'm getting a total sales of 501,000 regardless of month and year. And for east, I'm getting a total sales of 678,000. That is because I've defined my level of detail for this calculation to be just region. The way that I like to read this type of calculation is instead of fixed, I say for each region, give me the sum of sales. Okay? So again, I'm getting my sum of sales for each region. That's fantastic. Not quite what we're looking for, though. If I actually wanted to get this for each region and a trend line over a month and year, I'd have to add a little more level of detail. And I could do that by just adding some more dimensionality to this fixed statement. Maybe I want to say, you know what, let's take the month of order date and also include the year of order date. So now I'm saying for each region, for each month, for each year, give me the sum of sales. And let's hit apply. Hey, now we're getting somewhere. So now I have a line that is unique for my central, east, south, and west. And I'm getting a different value for every month and every year. The one thing that I'm not including in this level of detail calculation is category, right? Because the level of detail of our visualization, if you remember, is month, year, region, and category. But I've only defined 3 of those dimensions here, region, month, and year. So what that means is this line that I'm getting for central furniture, that's right here, is going to be exactly the same as this line right here for central office supplies. And the same could be said for central technology. Okay, so regardless of category in this case, we're going to get the total sales for that particular region in month and year. So that is how we can write these fixed level of detail calculations. I'm going to be honest with you, I typically write level of detail calculations using the fixed because I can be in complete control over the level of detail of the calculation that I want. Now, what do I mean by that? because there is another way of writing this calculation. I'm just going to use these two angle brackets to gray that out for a moment, and let's write a new calculation. But instead of using a fix, I'm going to write this exclude. I'm going to use exclude. And in this case, what it's saying is, what I'm telling my level of detail calculation is to say, use the level of detail of my visualization, but ignore some of the dimensions of the level of detail. So which one or what dimension are we ignoring in this first calculation? Well, we're ignoring category, right? We've addressed month and year and region, but we're ignoring category. So if I wanted to, I could say something like exclude category and give me the sum of sales and close that squiggly bracket. And these two calculations in this particular case are exactly the same. I could say okay. And you can see that these have not changed at all. But let me show you something. And let's bring this up. I apologize, I shouldn't have closed it. The reason why these are the same is because, well, I'm kind of assuming these four dimensions here, right? Region, month, year, and category. But what if I added another dimension? What if I added, I don't know, ship mode? I could take ship mode and, oops, drag that onto my canvas. Let me just do that, ship mode, and I'll just drag it to category. It's going to make a mess of all of our. But now you can see that these lines are very different. And the reason being is I am still, in this case, I'm saying, well, in this case, I'm saying, okay, well, include ship mode into my total sales calculation. So I'm going to get a total sales for every region, for every ship mode, for every month, every year. Okay? As opposed to this would say ignore ship mode entirely, just like I'm ignoring category. Okay, so completely different. So it depends on, do I want to lock down this calculation to be very specific in terms of what I want to define my level of detail at, or do I want it to be a little more fluid and work with the visualization but maybe ignore some? Again, I'm going to be honest, I hardly use exclude. Like I said, I like to use these fixed ones, and I want to be in control. Okay? So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of ship mode for a moment, and let's get rid of this guy. Go back to our fix because, like I said, that's what I like. There's also one, just to show you, I can also use, instead of using exclude, I could say include, and maybe I want to include ship mode into my level of detail. So ship mode isn't on my level of detail of my visualization, but include it here and give me the sum of sales, and boom, that is also a completely valid one. In this case, include, the level of detail calculation is going to be region, category, month, year, and ship mode. So totally different, but another thing that you can use. I don't use includes that often, but I'm sure you can find a use for them. But I'm going to go back to this fixed for a moment, and let's get this looking the way we want it. I'm going to set this to be for month and year. So fixed, month, year, sum of sales. So every month for every year, give me a sum of sales. And once I do that, now I'm going to change this visualization a little bit to get back to what we were trying for, which is just this. Because if you remember, the problem that we were trying to solve was, hey, when I click on appliances or bookcases or anything, I lose the context of what the trend line is for total sales, and we want to keep that. So let's bring that back in. So that's what this total sales is all about here. So for total sales, I'm going to change the look of this a little bit. I'm going to actually turn it into an area chart. And then let's go ahead and dual axis these. And of course, if I'm going to dual axis them, just make sure and synchronize the axis. And then let's just change the color here. So I want these both to be blue. And say OK. And I want my total Let's just drop this down even further. I want it to be really light. Just gives me a hint of what's going on. And let's make this pretty while we're at it. I'll just get rid of the headers. Um, and there we go. So what have we accomplished now? So now I have this great visualization here, and I haven't selected any subcategory. So I'm just seeing my total sale, my sales, which is essentially total sales because it's not for a particular subcategory. But once I choose bookcases, now this dark blue line is my trend line on my sales for bookcases, but the shadow in the background is still my total sales. Or how am I doing with accessories? How does that compare to total sales? Or binders or phones? All right, so that's giving us more context and gives more analytical depth of what it is that we're looking at. We don't lose context of a great insight once we click on something. So that's how you can leverage level of detail calculations. I'm going to go ahead and let's rename this to our trend, and we are good to go. And I'm going to create one more visualization here, and this one's kind of cool. And this one's actually interesting because I think, trying to think ahead here, I might be able to use either a level of detail calculation or a table calculation in this one, and I'll explain why I'm doing one versus the other. So let's take our sales and drag that onto columns. And let's take profit, drag that onto rows. Data visualization best practices kick in here. We just moved from a bar chart to a scatter because scatter is the best way to look at these two different measures. I'm going to take a subcategory and drag that on the level of detail so I get a mark for every one of my subcategories. Now, what I want to do is let's take our sales and drop that onto size. So now the size of the circle is based on the sum of sales for that particular subcategory. But one thing that I find hard to look at is which circle is bigger here, or how big. Once you get far away, I don't know. For me, it's like which one's bigger? I'm not quite sure. And you'll have to hover over and try to see where we're at, and that's not the best. I want things to just be immediately visual for me. So I'm going to do something here. Let's take sum of sales. I'm just going to drag that right on over. So now we have two of the same exact calculations. And my mouse just paused on me. There we go. All right, so we have two of the same visualizations now showing a scatter plot with the size of sum of sales. Okay, and let's go back to that max sales calculation. If you remember that one, that was this window max. So I said earlier that I think I could do this either with a level of detail or a table calculation. And here's kind of the defining thing. Let me see if I can walk through this. Because what I want is I want a halo around each one of these circles, and the halo is going to be the sum of sales for the largest circle, okay, which I think in this case is phones. Okay, so I want a little hover over, or little shadow behind each one of these circles that'll just kind of help me compare to the largest. Now that I think about it, I probably couldn't do a level of detail calc here, but I could if I wanted to just be how does it compare to total sales. I can do one of two things. I can either say let this be a level of detail calc and do my total sales, or I can do a table calculation that is not a window max but a window sum. Let's grow this out, because another formula that I can use is a window sum and not even define a window. So in that case, it's just saying for everything in here, sum them all together, and then that's going to provide a halo for us. So that's cool. We can try that one. But what I like is I want to say, give me a halo for the biggest one because I want to see how it compares. But the window max, if you remember, we can do a start and an end and define an ever-changing window. But in this case, I don't want to do that. I just want this to be for the entire calculation or entire visualization. So just give me the window max, sum of sales, and I'm good to go. So let's go do this. And I want to now, for this guy here, I'm going to change and add this onto size. And it didn't change anything. I have to compute using, and I'm going to say compute using subcategory. So now that you're seeing here, this is showing window max. The one on the left is showing the size of the circle is based off of sum of sales, and the one on the right, the size of the circle is based off of window max for every subcategory, by subcategory. So, and I'm just going to change the look of this for a moment. I'm going to move this from a circle to, or from a shape to a circle, and let's just really decrease the opacity here so it just turns into a little bit of a shadow. There we go. And now let me just dual axes these guys, and again make sure I synchronize my axes. Let's make this pretty by getting rid of some headers. There we go. And so now what I have is a nice scatter plot where it's showing me the halo effect on how it's comparing, how each one of these subcategory sales is comparing to the best selling subcategory. Okay, so it's just adding some context to our scatter plot. So now that we have that, I'm just going to go ahead and rename my scatter, and then let's bring this all together into our dashboard. So let's go back to this dashboard that we built out. You can see that we have our wonderful waterfall chart. We have our trend, and let's add scatter right here next to it. Oops, not below it. Right next to it, and get rid of these guys one more time. There we go. And so now one other thing that we need to change is when I go ahead and click on bookcases, you'll see that this filters down nicely, but what it also does is it filters my scatter plot, and I don't want that. I just lost context of how bookcases compares to all the other subcategories. And the way that I need to do that, I'm going to come up here to my dashboard menu and choose actions, because when we clicked on this little filter icon, it created an action for us, and that action is right here. I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to call this our trend filter, because ultimately when I click on the waterfall, I want it to change only my trend, so I'm going to deselect scatter and waterfall. So now it's only when I click on anything on my waterfall chart, it's only going to change the trend chart. Say OK. And then I want to choose a different type of filter. I'm going to create my own filter here and choose highlight. And in this case, when I click on the waterfall again, it's only going to change my scatter. And say OK. And so what does that do for us now? So I have nothing selected. I'm seeing a trend line for total sales. I'm seeing all my sales for subcategory with a halo for the max. And then when I choose bookcases, I'm now seeing a line just for bookcases. I'd still kept my context with total sales. And it's just highlighting for me the location of bookcases on my scatter plot, or the location of tables, or what was if it was the, let's go to phones, check out, and that should be right there. There we go. So that's how we do it. So let's rewind for a moment. We went through our table calculations. We've learned the trick of using index and first and last to help navigate and traverse our tables. We've also did some create our own to just kind of do a lookup into the first month sales, and then create our own kind of moving window to get our max sales. So all really capable calculations that will help with our analytics. The window max was here as well. We also created a great waterfall chart by using table calculations, but in this case we used that running total table calculation right there. super easy. And then we also created that cool trend with a level of detail calculation. So we have sales. Sales is indicated by that blue line, and total sales is that level of detail calculation. We're just saying, you know what? Give me total sales for every month and every year, and everything will be good right there. So ignore subcategory at all. So where this one is actually, the blue line is actually category or subcategory month and year. The blue area is just month and year. And we brought that all together in a pretty cool little viz or dashboard that will add some more context to your analytics. Hopefully this was really good and helpful for you guys. Please give it a try, and don't be afraid to use table calculations, level of detail calculations. They're really going to highlight your data and take your dashboards to new heights. Thank you.